Hello, welcome to episode 2 of the Zero Hangout Podcast. I've replaced Phoenix for the week and we have a new name, kinda. We go through some of the action from opening round and one of the more polarizing talking points from the first weekend of footy. We have a little bit of a look into round 1 and some of the games on for the weekend ahead. We name the stories we want to see in 2025 and we go over our footy tips for round 1 also. All that and more in this week's episode. Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Zero Hangout Podcast for 2025. And yes, it's not the Handy Point podcast. After we got some feedback after our massive first episode. And yes, I've already usurped Phoenix as the host. He's away this week after some comments. People weren't too happy with his efforts and his takes. No, it's okay. He'll be back next week. But yes, we are under for a name change. Turns out after our 2 minutes of trying to find a name for a footy show that given there are 40 going on at the moment, Handy Point Podcast already exists, and a shout out to James and the team that already run the Handy Point Podcast and all the efforts and analysis and stuff that they bring to the table in football media. So after you watch us, after you subscribe, like, comment, whatever you're going to do with us, you can go and check them out on all their podcast platforms as well. But yeah, what that means for us, we don't know. No name for this episode, which is fun. I don't know. Is it fun? I don't know. You can. What we are going to do, we maybe throw it out to fans. As I said, it took us 2 minutes to come up with a name. We need another 2 minutes to come up with a different name. If you've got one in mind that hasn't been taken, which is probably something we could have gone over it in our first one. But we'll blend the legal department and marketing and all those groups that we've definitely got working for us. But anyway, I should introduce who's on today. Aidan was back with us last week for his, I think, first HTV episode of the year.
Yes.
Yeah. And we've got Darren Parkin joining us for today in the absence of Cal and Phoenix. Darren, how are you?
Going well, yeah. The legal team tapped us on the shoulder. So off the top of my head, what about like Hanger 360?
Yeah,
that doesn't sound like it's taken.
That should be fine, yeah. Hanger 360 is what it will be for now. But as I said, yeah, if you've got a better name, we're open to suggestions. Or we could just end up being the Zero Hangout Podcast. That seems to work anyway. But anyway, a bit of a laugh, fun start to the season. And hopefully you'll be able to find us for our third episode under whatever name we're going to be called. So anyway, let's digress and actually get into some footy, because we did have some footy over the week a few days ago now, but we don't have to really break down too much of the games that happened, but just some early looks and what that might mean rolling into round 1. And I guess the start of the season has really brought quite a polarizing talking point for what is usually quite a fun start to the year and something that's really divided fans. And no, I'm not actually talking about opening round, but I'm talking about the Fox and Channel 7 score bugs, because I think a lot of people, and I knew that there was a change coming. I didn't know what they looked like, but I knew there was a change coming. Obviously, I'm assuming most footy fans wouldn't have expected to see the new score bugs on whether you're watching Fox or so. Who did you guys watch for? Was it Friday night in the end?
I was KOing, so all the Fox feeds for me. And yeah, I must admit, it jumped out at me. I think if there are changes, you like it to be subtle. And to me, it sort of jumped off the screen. I'm like, well, that's different. And you were sort of thinking about it for a little while. I started texting mates going, what do you make of that? But yeah, I think score bugs peaked in about 1992. So if they could go back to that, it would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I watched the Friday game on Fox as well. And the commentary team was great. And then we spoke about it during the week. And I was really looking forward to Waitley and Hitout kind of combining there, but I'm not too sure yet. But again, it's only the first round. But as you said, kind of those score bugs, it reminded me maybe, an AFL Live video game that, we all probably used to play how many years ago. So yeah, not too sure if I'm all...
It'll grow. Like I like Channel 7s. I didn't like Foxes. I think, and like they're probably Americanizing it a little bit, and I don't really care too much if that's the case. I think Foxes was either too big or not big enough, if that makes sense. It's either too big because they had like the Friday night footy and Sunday ticket logo in the corner, which you didn't need. Then they've got the quarter and the time were massive. Like there was as big as like the club logos on like the 7 one. And then they've got the club logo, then they've got the abbreviation abbreviation, whatever it is.
Like HEW.
HAW. So they've got the Hawk logo and HAW, and then they've got the score, and it takes up probably a third. I feel like you may as well either go the full strip across the bottom if you're going to have all that stuff, or you just make it really short, which is what 7 did. So 7's was pretty cool. They just had the logos. They had the quarter and the time like as like a kind of fraction, like just as they've had, I think, from the last few years anyway. And it was central, which, you're not putting up, if it's kind of this awkward length, central, I think works better than taking up 3/4 and having that weird little patch in the bottom that's just free. But yeah, I liked sevens. I didn't really rate Foxes. So, but I do prefer watching Fox. So it's kind of going to annoy me. So we'll see. We'll see. I can understand why fans don't like it and change and stuff like that. And on top of opening round, which is probably what we should talk about, and everything else that's gone on over the past week, we've been only getting 2 games to start the season. So what did we make of the actual action? What did we like about opening round this year? Because I feel like there's going to be a lot that people weren't too happy with, just given 2 games to start the year. But what did we like from the weekend, and what would we like to see maybe next year for opening round? Given we'll probably go back to a bit of a norm, but it should still stay at 4 games.
Yeah, look, they were hurt a bit by Queensland losing both games. I know a lot of people pointed to the fact that Melbourne had a long weekend with Labor Day. It's not Labor Day everywhere in Australia at the same time, but certainly in Melbourne it was. I mean, it ended up being a 35-degree weekend. So you think about if they were playing football in Melbourne, that would have been problematic. I don't mind the discussion that a few people brought up that does it have to be an opening round, or can you showcase the New South Wales and Queensland games as the marquee fixtures? So play the SCG game, Sydney Hawthorn on the Thursday, had it been Brisbane Geelong, subject to the weather, on the Friday night, or vice versa. And then the rest of your round proceeds as normal, but they get the marquee blocks as a means of sort of pushing that. It kind of felt like we were left, wanting a little bit more. I mean, we were supposed to have 2 more games, but even that probably would have left us in that same position, thinking, okay, is this an extension of pre-season? Are we into it? There's not another game for 2 days. So, yeah, it was a little bit underwhelming, even if the games were pretty good.
Yeah, the concept itself, I think, has merit. Clearly, in those states, it's dominated by NRL. So to kind of see some growth in promotion in those states is a good thing for the game. As we have alluded to, we did miss out on 2 games. But I did hear something interesting, more of a suggestion from a former player in Jonathan Brown, who played many years up at the Lions, and he suggested that potentially they could look at playing an opening round, not necessarily maybe reframing it as opening round, but Northern round in the middle of winter. So obviously,
like gather round.
Yeah, not a bad idea.
Like a gather round up there.
Like
so
during the buys though, so they wouldn't have all.
Yeah. So during the buys, and then I mean, more often than not, Victorians seem to head north or even west to kind of get out of that cold. It's usually 10, 15 degrees here, pretty miserable. But those northern states do obviously get a little bit warmer and still might have a few nicer days. And we saw on the weekend 2 games called off or postponed. From the Cyclone, Pies, Giants were played in 35-degree heat. The Hawks and Swans had a bit of rain and a bit of heat as well. And last year was sort of a similar kind of conditions as well to deal with. So it could be something for the AFL to consider. I know Andrew Dillon's pretty keen to keep his opening round baby going. He obviously has a lot of success being kind of a standalone fixture or on the weekend, with obviously other teams just waiting on the sidelines to get their turn in round 1. But I think there's still a lot of improvement areas they could kind of alter just to make sure that the promotion of the game is maximised to its full extent.
It's not a bad shout. Early Queensland in March, you can either get very hot or very volatile weather like we've got. So, I mean, the Queensland winters are quite appealing. So, whether May or June is a better option. Yeah,
I don't mind it. I think Corbin Middlemass was another one that said, bring it to a 2-week bye period in the middle of the year, and the first half is those 4 games that they want to tick off. My next kind of follow-up question before we kind of move on from opening round was, well, who plays next year? You spoke to Jordan Clark this week, and he said that the WA clubs are probably pretty happy to avoid playing so early in the season. And there's disadvantage whether it's too hot or you have what we had this week, and that extra rest actually might come in handy. The clubs that do participate in open round do get a break mid-season, which is kind of nice, although it's in the first 4 or 5 rounds. So maybe WA clubs, and then they might not have that big pull either. Like I think they obviously the AFL's only looked at the Victorian clubs to head up. Then you've got Collingwood, who are the AFL want to have there every year, and then hear Craig McRae post game saying, "I don't know if I want to be there every year." So should they start looking at some of the SA and WA clubs for opening round next year? Because they're relying on a club like Collingwood, who travels really well, to bring some decent crowds to probably GWS and Gold Coast are really their focus here as well. Like Sydney do a pretty good job, and Brisbane too, but it's the 2 younger clubs that obviously struggle for crowds. And even GWS, Collingwood, I think got sub to 20 grand.
Yeah, I think 19.
So it's like if it wasn't Collingwood playing, are the AFL really going to be happy if it's the Western Bulldogs, St Kilda, North Melbourne, even Geelong? I don't know.
Last year they went probably the 3 best performed Victorian teams of the year before, which were Collingwood, Carlton, Melbourne, and then threw Richmond in for their supporter base.
And Dimmer Hardwick game.
The Dimmer game. This year they kind of did similar, where you had Collingwood, Geelong was scheduled, Hawthorn obviously played, and then they were going to have Essendon, who are another that draws pretty well with a degree of interest in it. So do they assess it again on the season this year, where you would anticipate, say, Hawthorn go well as a big team? Let's say it's Hawthorn, Carlton, and Geelong. And then do you find another reasonably strong drawing club somewhere around that? But yeah, I mean, Collingwood aren't going to want to do it 3 times.
No.
WA sides aren't going to want to do it.
For WA and SA fans listening, because obviously there is the Vic versus non-Vic kind of debate that will go on forever. I'm keen to hear if they would be happy to be playing in these opening round fixtures, and if they would travel to New South Wales or Queensland for these games. That'll be interesting to see. Before we move on, just want to actually touch on some performances from the weekend, because we probably should talk about actual football as well on a football podcast. Some pretty headline acts from some young guys. Finn Callaghan, probably the biggest talking point from the weekend. Obviously, there was a bit going on with him in the lead up to the season, just given the reported numbers around what St Kilda might have offered him to try and get him to come back down to the Bayside. But he re-signed with the Giants not too long ago, and then put in a performance that really actually probably has him warranting a $17 million tag, which I don't think many people would have thought we would be seeing this time last week. So he was one. Will Day was another, who's another one that's got so much promise. And we obviously saw that a couple of seasons ago when he won their best and fairest, but absolute star against the Swans, and Sam Taylor as well. I think they were probably the 3 biggest performances from the weekend.
I mean, Callaghan stood out for me. I think it was 33 touches, 2 goals, but he just seemed like he was in everything. He'd take the ball from inside to out, which is what, that's the Giants' MO, to kind of get speed on the ball, creative handballs, overlap run. And I mean, we saw one of his goals, which, again, I'm not saying it's goal of the year caliber, but getting that initial clearance, 2 or 3, 4 efforts, repeat efforts, find himself inside 50, and he left the Dacos brothers in his wake. Scott Penry, albeit maybe a little bit older and speed not on his side, left him in his wake. He just has this burst of speed and these quick feet, which you hear a lot of recruiters and list managers talk about now, in terms of that's what they want midfielders to have, this quick feet, turn of speed, because they need to get the ball from inside to out to catch, opposition defenses off guard. And Finn Callaghan has that in spades. And, he's only, 21 years old. And you can see he's kind of like that Bontempelli-esque tall.
Yeah, him and Will Day are both these little baby Bonts. It'll be interesting to see how they're still kind of different players at the same time, which is interesting. But I think when you look at what Callaghan's doing now, and now you look at the 2021, the top 5 of that draft, probably a task that we could come back to next week. But if you're reordering that top 5 in what is now looming as a very, very strong draft, outside of those top 5 is very good too. I think Jai Amos, Josh Gibcus are in the top 10 there. Nazai Wang and Ian Miller is a few spots later. But you got Horn Francis at 1. You got Sam Darcy at 2. I think it was Callaghan at 3. And then Dacos 4 and Mac Andrew at 5.
Yeah.
That is 5 guys who are now entering their 4th season, who are genuine, could all be among the best in their positions by the end of the year. So thankfully, and Melbourne fans are going to hate me saying this, and good thing Phoenix isn't on this week. Thankfully, Mac Andrew wasn't tied. When you're having three of the top 5 in that draft all tied to a specific club, and thankfully he wasn't tied. I would have liked to see him at Melbourne. He's doing great things with Gold Coast. Sit on whatever side of the fence you want on that one. But when you have Dacos, Darcy already tied, and I'm kind of okay with the father-son. NGA I'm still kind of okay with, but it's kind of interesting. And you've also got Horn Francis, who's gone back home. So really, Callaghan's the only one who hasn't gone to a club that he kind of thought he who wasn't club tied. Obviously, Andrew went to the Suns, but he's also, turned down the opportunity to go back home, as has Andrew, I should say.
Unfortunately.
And he's starring, and he is starring at the moment,
He is, and I mean, on that 2 days first half, he had 19 and kicked 3 in the first half. They tagged him after half time with some effect, but they also copped a bit of a niggle and then came back and finished the game okay. But, he missed a lot of footy last year during Hawthorn's charge. Likewise, Taylor at the Giants with that eye-watering injury. But he, he's such a crucial part of what they put together. Their defensive numbers end of 2023, when they exploded from sort of 14th, 13th, 14th to top 4 and nearly a grand final. And then into last year was absolutely pivotal. So their defence is one of the major reasons why they'll challenge for the flag, and he's one of the major reasons why that is the case.
Yeah, I think Sam Taylor, he just needs to play 18 games and he'll get an All-Australian blazer. It wasn't the case last year. I think another season. He does have one blazer. I think he could have 4 by the end of this year, or could have had 4 if assuming he gets 1 this year. He's just been that strong, just hasn't been able to play as many games as he'd hoped due to injury. Let's roll into round 1 and just quickly previewing some of the games that we want to focus on. And probably coming off the back of the 2 clubs that lost on the weekend is going to be a great focus. So we had Sydney and Collingwood now going in to games against Brisbane, which is a grand final rematch for the Swans, and against Port Adelaide, which is going to be a bit of a crunch game for the Pies on Saturday night.
Yeah, the reasons, I guess, for those. So Sydney, coming off last year, the pain of the grand final, the coaching change, then they play 2 contenders in their first 2 games. They fall slightly short against Hawthorn. They weren't horrible in that game, but fell a bit short. Now they play Brisbane, their combatant from the grand final. If they lose both of those, 0-2, they didn't lose their second game until round 16 or something last year. So if they lose their first 2 this time, both to sides that are in the mix for flags, and you think it starts to create some degree of doubt that, where are we in terms of both at home, mind you, as well. And then Collingwood's, they've copped a bit fairly or unfairly out of last week in terms of prep and fitness, which is a bit premature, I think. If they come back at home and lose to Port, who they generally handle at the MCG pretty well, then obviously that keeps that pressure on them. But they've got a chance to sort of shake that straight off if they beat Port and just say, no, we're okay. We lost to a very good side. We entered the season not in super shape, but we're all right. So, if they lose the game, it starts to look a bit like the start of last season where they dropped a couple early. So, yeah, big for both of them.
Yeah, I think with the Sunday game with the Pies and Giants, the Giants clearly won that game. It was theirs to win. They just absolutely battered them both inside and outside. So it's more credit to the Giants and not necessarily a knock on Collingwood, especially, it's only been 4 quarters into their season. But you'd think if they don't respond against Port Adelaide in front of their home crowd, they've got Dan Houston obviously playing. He's probably going to be playing his first game against his old mob as well. You got Perriman who injects some excitement, some energy into the club at being new as well, same as Membry. If they don't respond, you think, not alarming bells. We've seen teams in the past kind of respond after 0-3, like the Lions last year. Even Collingwood kind of got back into the mix before just falling short. So you can see they've got the talent, but it's interesting. Craig McRae's kind of divided up the season into the year into seasons. So he's gone, this is autumn at the moment, which is essentially a summer sport. Winter, you need experience, and then hopefully you can contend in spring. And it looks like Collingwood's not trying to break it down, but they're trying to kind of break up the season in certain periods.
So it's not just an excuse.
And well, we'll see maybe after this week. But he's kind of, trying to, use the depth because there's a lot of injuries more in the earlier part of the year. But then lean on his experience kind of in the middle part. So it'll be interesting to see how they kind of attack maybe the first 4, 5, 6 weeks in terms of how many players they kind of run through there, as opposed to relying on too many of their stars, which as proven last year, they kind of chucked them in when they weren't at 100% to perform, which is his words as well. So I think, again, obviously it's hard to make it a big assessment on one game. I usually like to wait to maybe around 5 or 6 after 5 or 6 games, maybe a month or so into the season to kind of see where people fall in the pecking order or clubs. But, you'd have to think they'd have to respond on Saturday night against the Power.
They've got a round 4. What are we up to? Round 3 bye, I think. And then I think it's the Dogs after the game against Port, which will be interesting. And I might roll into the Dogs because they're one of the other games keen to talk about this weekend. Just given the injuries that they've got at the moment and a lot that they'll also be missing when they come up against Collingwood. But just a quick look. So they've got 4 tests. We haven't hit selection yet this week, so we don't know if these guys will be playing. They could be by the time our listeners and watchers are looking at our shoe. But Bailey Dale, Ed Richards, Riley West, Latham Vandermeer, all tests. So 50-50. But then they've got Treloar, Jason Johannesson, Cody Waitman, Marcus Bontempelli, Liam Jones and Anthony Scott all out for up to the next 4 weeks.
Stuff as well.
And then there's Jamara as well. So they've got North Melbourne first up, which, like, if you're a Roos fan, are you probably assuming that they are winning this game? Like, are you having them as favourites? The Roos, do you think they've got the mettle to actually take it up to a dog side who is missing, I reckon, 8 to 9 best 23 players, including Bont, who's, in my eyes, the best player in the competition. Jamara, who is a big loss, but they do have Norton and Darcy. Liam Jones might be their most valuable player, given that they're now relying on Rory Lobb.
Larky as well.
And then Adam Treloar, among some of the other names, and Ed Richards. If they lose both Ed Richards, Treloar, and then on top of Bontempelli, that's a problem.
Waitman's a big out too.
Yeah, and then Waitman too. And then Bailey Dale too, another All-Australian. I kind of just went through the list again. But we'll get into tips a bit later, but how do we kind of see this one matching up?
Well, it's perfect, hitting practice for North Melbourne. They've got a battered dogs, as you've mentioned. There's an extensive list of probably 6 or 7 in their top 10 best and fairest from the last few years. So you'd have to think North Melbourne are really sizing up for this game. They've got a lot of young talent that is just ready to pop. You got Sheasel leading from the front there. LDU continues to perform at a high level despite his lingering contract status. Jai Simpkin looks to have, again, a ripper summer. He's now sole captain of the club. Nick Larkey's got the assistance of Jack Darling, Caleb Daniel off halfback. Luke Parker adds that experience both in the front half and through the midfield. Griffin Logue's returned from a knee. So they've got all these pieces coming together slowly. Again, that's not to say they're going to make this stoic run to the finals, but again, you come up against the battered Bulldogs who, funnily enough, like to be the underdog in a lot of their scenarios. I think Luke Beveridge kind of really leans on that when he kind of speaks and gets his players up and about. But for Clarko, you're going, you know what, you go hit him hard, hit him early, and then you get them right into the game, and hopefully it kind of stings the Dogs a little bit, and then they can kind of just grind out, potentially win, which might get North fans up and about early in the season.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So, I mean, you got a couple of North's games, second half of last year, at Marvel, where they lost their way a bit, but Collingwood and Carlton, they were in it till halfway through the last. Collingwood, they were, 9 goals up or something?
No, 54, 54.
And then sort of dropped it late, but how organised and how slick they looked at times in those matches in the second half of the year, you'd expect them to improve again. I mean, the Dogs' numbers at the end of last year were terrific. Like, they were, highest scoring side, best defensive side, I think top 2 for attack and all of that, and then just ran into a red-hot Hawthorn in the final. So they're a pretty good side, but depleted. So, yeah, it's a huge free kick for North, or free swing for North at that. They're right in it. Yeah,
that'll be an interesting one. The other one I want to highlight, D's versus Giants, and maybe a more pointed part of discussion, is we'll get to see Christian Petrarca and Clayton Oliver back together, which will be, I think, I'm very excited by. I think Track obviously going off what is well documented the last 8 to 9 months have been, and then Clayton Oliver now having a full preseason after having none the year before. What kind of expectations should we be having on these two for the year? Two players who have every right to probably be in the top 5 players in the competition mix when they're at their best, but obviously just so much has happened for them over the past 12 to 18 months that, are we pulling back the expectations this year, or should we be expecting Christian Petrarca, who is so much of a professional, that he'll be ready to go, and he looks ready and ripe, and as does Clary. So what do we kind of see their seasons unfolding?
Well, I think you touched on that, the word professional, and I understand it's been widely documented what they've gone through the last couple of years, both with their respective issues and stories with the club, but again, as you mentioned, top 5 players at their best, they could be rivaling Brownlow medals. They were up there. They've been, they've seen votes from umpires. They're club best and fairest All-Australians. They've done it all from an individual standpoint as well as a premiership. I think in terms of expectation for both Clary and Petrarca is, again, it might dip initially from what we maybe expect of them, during kind of Melbourne's purple patch, so to speak, in their premiership years and contending years. But again, all reports are saying they're coming back. They're looking good. The preseason game against the Dockers, I think they both collected over 30 touches. They both hit the scoreboard. So they still have the capacity to impact games, tenfold, which the Demons desperately need and have needed for a while. So I think it's exciting for Melbourne fans. Hopefully they've kind of put all their issues behind them, or still working on them in a positive aspect, and getting these guys back at the club. They look like they're smiling. They're enjoying their football again. And obviously with that, hopefully comes winning, which means you'll enjoy football even more.
Yeah, there was a lot of that talk around Melbourne about what might happen, and none of it did, really. I mean, there was Pickett, there was Petrarca, there was Oliver, there was all of that discussion. But their list is pretty much intact. Obviously, Neil Bullen left, and, 1 or 2 other pieces around the edges. But, and agree on that practice match against Fremantle. Oliver, at times, his ball use was a little bit rusty, but certainly at the coalface, he was good. And the only question on Petrarca was, how was the body going to be after the horrible injury from last year, and that looks pretty sound. It looks like he hasn't missed a beat. So really encouraging for them. You combine those two with Gawn, and it's still one of the best groups in the competition without a doubt. Yeah,
definitely. I've got them in my top 8, and I definitely want to see those two in particular back to their best in 2025. And that kind of is a nice little segue into our next talking point is what is the story we want to see this season? We did our predictions last week on how we think things, what might unfold, and some interesting takes were laid out on the table. But, what's something, if we can kind of get to see a nice little Cinderella story, or it's just something a little bit more positive, maybe something for a particular fan base or player or club or coach. What do we want to see? What would we like to see this year? And I might start with you.
Well, North Melbourne to improve now. There's so many stories that you'd like to see in terms of re-signings, premierships, players going into the sunset of their career. But I think for me, North Melbourne just kind of shine a little glimmer of hope for their fans. They've obviously been starved of finals, I believe, since 2015, 2016. They've been at the bottom of the well for some time now. They got the Messiah in Alistair Clarkson to potentially lift them off, kind of the bottom part there, and so far they haven't. But the inclusion of some experienced heads, coupled with the improvement and development of their young stars, and then the subsequent kind of re-signing of a few of them as well, and hoping LDU does the same. It'll be good to see them notch up, close to 6 to 8 wins, and really not only just necessarily just claim victories, but also be in games. There's a few games last year, as Daz mentioned, Carlton and Collingwood games, and these guys are potential contenders. Obviously, the Blues making finals last year, but I'd like to see them really run out games to, halfway through the last quarter even, potentially testing a Brisbane or testing a Sydney, as opposed to kind of folding before half time, and then, you can kind of turn off the TV because, it's going to be a 10-goal loss. So I'd like to see North Melbourne have it play with a bit more heart, a bit more, I guess, dare in some aspects as well. And I guess that's kind of my headline in terms of what I'd like to see for the year.
Darren?
Yeah, what the AFL might want to see, and they might get one expansion side win the flag and the other one make the finals for the first time. It's possible. But for me, it's news that sort of developed in the last couple of days about Adelaide putting a significant offer in front of Nasiah Wanganeen-Miller, the South Australian-born St Kilda halfback. And as a Saints fan, he's a very prized signature. They've locked most of their key targets away. He's the one that makes me a little bit nervous with the go-home factor. He's a very important part of what St Kilda are trying to build. Ross Lyon spoke during the week about how they've turned over 20 players in 2 years, and there's a clear plan to get rid of some of the guys that had them mid-table and bring in fresh youth, and Wanganeen-Miller is almost the pick of those players.
Absolutely.
They've got to make sure they lock him away.
Yeah. How do you kind of feel about, like, you've got the TDK and LDU links? Obviously, the Callahan ones we mentioned earlier. Brayshaw was said to be obviously in your sights for obvious reasons. Like, what does that kind of state of play read for you? With you can throw a lot of money out and try and get these big guys, but you've got this kid who, and the halfback role is a lot different to a bursting midfielder and a ruck forward who could be one of the best in the competition. But he might just be the priority for given the way Ross likes to play his game and how at times. Maybe not even at times, how poor St Kilda were with their forward entry last year. If you can find him a bit further up the field, he's the one delivering the ball to Max King. That makes Ross's job a whole lot easier. And
one thing they were doing quite well was transitioning. Their movement from defensive 50 to attacking 50 was one thing they were actually quite good at through Wanganeen-Miller, Sinclair, and those sorts of players. Obviously, the Battle contract goes off their books from last season, so that frees up a bit of cash. They've re-signed Max King long-term, so that one's done. Then you've got Filippo and Darcy Wilson. And Mitch Owens has signed as well recently. So, I think it's one thing to have those big targets, but you've got to look at what you've got inside and lock those guys away too. So, I mean, I'm not sure what the numbers are from the Adelaide offer, but there's a belief that there is one there. So,
Mine's kind of similar. Actually, I might throw a different one out after it, but mine's kind of similar. I'd love to see Harley Reid re-sign at West Coast.
It's good for the comp.
I think there's a lot of people would, maybe except Freo fans. It would be. It'd just be awesome to see, what he's provided in 1 year and what he's expected to provide this year, and then he'll have another year on his contract. But even if it's a 1 year extension, 2 years, I think he needs an extra 5 to go all the way to free agency, which might be an option, but it also might be wishful thinking from a West Coast point of view. So 2 year deal would keep a lot of people happy, get him a couple of years, and hopefully by that point they're a bit of a different team in terms of their contention. The other one I wanted to mention is hopefully I can see David Swallow playing in a final. Like, if we can get not only Gold Coast getting all their way up to September, but it'd be great to see a player who's stuck around since day one.
Is he the only original?
When Sam Day left, he was the last one. So I was hoping maybe I think it was 2 years ago when under Stuart Dew, when they had a pretty good chance 2 or 3 years ago. And I think they were still just those two that were there as part of their best side. So Swallow every right to still be in that mix as a best 23 player. I think he will be for most of this year, and they'll manage him where they need to. But yeah, it'd be absolutely awesome to see him playing some September footy. Sam Day might have that chance with Brisbane, assuming he locks in a spot in their side and they make the 8 again. So that would be one I would like to see. Before we wrap up, let's get into tipping, because obviously zero hanger tipping is new for this season and something we introduced on last week's show, and the points model that, if a club's paying $1.90, you get 190 points for them on the win. But if a club's paying $2.60, you can take the $260 points on the win. So how did we go last week? You weren't on last week's show, so I'm assuming you didn't get your tips. But Aidan how'd you go?
0.
You're 0?
Yeah.
Had the pies and
swans and pies.
For the record,
which was pretty popular.
For the record, I tipped Sydney and GWS.
Yeah,
so
okay.
1-1.
Yeah, I had Sydney and GWS, and I think I pocketed 220 points. Let me have a look. 220 points. So on our looking at the zero hanger tipping leaderboard, there's a heap. There's about 10. What's that? Top 8 are all on 410, so they would have done the double. A few more on 405, 400, 395, 380, and then there's a drop from 380 to 220 at about the top 22 mark. So top 22 got both right, and some had varying success on when they put their tips in. And obviously you can change your tips as the kind of point scale changes. But looking ahead to round 1's tipping, we won't have to go through everyone's tips for every game, but I tell you what, there is some value. If anyone wants to take Richmond at 1,000 points, you are more than welcome to do so. I'll be taking Carlton's 105. But outsiders, anyone, how many have we got that are probably above the 200 point range?
It's interesting of Geelong's formidable Cardinia Park record over the years, probably for 12 or 13 years. The side that's done okay down there under multiple coaches is Freo.
Yeah.
They would have won 4 or 5 times down there, I think. So I've got reasonably high expectations on them this year. I mean, the Cats still hard to beat, but I think Freo at the 260 points on offer, that's got some appeal to it. And you spoke about North. They're about 320, I think, against the Dogs.
They are. They're at 320, which I've got North beating the Dogs. I've got Freo beating Geelong. Any outsiders you've gone for, or all favourites?
I think I've actually gone more of the favourites. I do think, though, as we've kind of touched on, North Melbourne could be a bit of a smoky. They've ranked at 320 points now against the Bulldogs, and for all the reasons we said before, the depleted list with all the injuries at the Dogs and the influx of experience at the Roos, they're definitely a chance to kind of cause an upset.
Yeah, I've managed to go Port over Collingwood, 245 points I got Port at, and they're currently based at 235. So I've got my 10 extra there. I've got 3 extra on the Crows to beat St Kilda as well. So yeah, get your tips in and see how you go. Obviously, with how the scoring model works, it's pretty easy to catch up if you can get an outsider or two. So there's about 200 people already signed up, and it's never too late to get part of tipping. So if you haven't already, feel free to jump on at Zero Hanger.
Creates a fascinating thing late in the season where you might say you're in an office tipping comp and you're one off the lead. The last round, people start to tip outsiders.
Yeah, exactly. Like
and
you
now
can
it
just
obviously
make
gives
a
you the
late
chance to really
surge.
load that up. And
so
chase.
real value.
So,
real value for the the upset tips for those that kind of like to back a dark horse. So yeah, you can head to zerohanger.com/tipping to get your tips in and set up an account and put yourself in the running for this year's tipping competition. Call it there. Lovely show, Zero Hanger Podcast. We might have a new name next week. Thank you, Darren and Aidan, for joining.
Our pleasure.
And we'll be back, ahead of round 2 of the season. Obviously, in the meantime, you can go to zerohanger.com to get all your latest news, views, and analysis. Get your tips in. You can also still go and get our free 2025 season guide. Got profiles and plenty of info and team lists and fixtures and just about everything you need for the season. So if you haven't got that already, you can get your free download on zerohanger.com.